Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland and Government House Leader Karina Gold are expected to enter the race later this week. So where do these latest developments leave the Liberal leadership race? Let's take stock with our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Now, Brian, you didn't announce this today. You announced last week. We are actually among someone who also is not running in this race, because there was some speculation that you might jump in. I have to ask you pretty bluntly, like, Christy Clark's assessment was basically the Prime Minister left it so that nobody has great options unless you've been organizing for the last year. That, in fact, is what I'm told she said to her core team on the call this morning. Is that your sense? Like, they're dropping like flies now. Dominic LeBlanc, François-Philippe Champagne, Melanie Joly, yourself, Christy Clark. Like, what does that say in the aggregate?
Well, a few things. So number one, I think it shows that this is going to be expedited, and it's completely normal for a bunch of people to kick the tires and then ultimately come to a conclusion that they're not going to run. Perhaps you actually end up having quite a few that run and they drop off as things progress, when maybe some type of deposit is due for paying to the party. So this is completely normal, but this is just very quick. So it feels, to Lisa's point, like it's been an eternity since last week, because every day there's somebody, if not two or three people, saying that they're not running for the leadership when they were speculated to be thinking about it, or frankly, they were actually organizing. So it feels a bit kind of weird because it's so quick, but this would be normal if it were expanded over a year, half a year, even 2 years at times, when some parties have that sort of runway. The second thing that I think it says, we sort of have the quarterfinals, the tennis analogy here, but the quarterfinals, the semis, before the finals. And that's normal as well. And it kind of goes to what I was discussing. But I think what's being set up is clearly a race that the party's going to have to decide. Do they want somebody that has been a part of the Trudeau government, that obviously has a skill set, that obviously has the capability to govern? They've been doing it for a while. They obviously know a lot of Liberals and have been sort of fighting the good fight, if you will. Or do you want an outsider? So it just feels like they've already decided, or it feels like it's starting to coalesce which outsider is going to remain standing in the finals. And I think we're probably going to start to see a candidate or two in the sort of other camp that they have been a part of the Trudeau government, and that will be the decision point essentially for the party.
Lisa, I love your facial expression as Brian was describing Mark Carney as an outsider. Conservatives would not classify Mr. Carney as an outsider at all, is my guess, right, Lisa?
Listen, let me just say that he's as much an outsider as I am an outsider. This guy's been the Trudeau whisperer since 2020. And before that, he's been in his ear on COVID. He was part of Building Back Better. He chairs an economic task force. I think they wanted to replace both Morneau and Chrystia Freeland with them. As we'd say in Cape Breton, butter wouldn't melt in this guy's mouth. He is not an outsider. It's a valiant effort to claim that he is one in order to paint a different narrative. But the proof is in the pudding. And don't equate just the fact that you don't have a high public profile to the ordinary Canadian voter as being an outsider, because people are going to see right through that.
He is going to, I think it's clear based on that interview last night, Tom, that will be part of his pitch, right, to Liberal voters. I am not what the other ones are, like Chrystia Freeland or Karina Gold. I have not been on the inside of this government that you do not like. Do you think, A, that message will resonate with Liberal voters? And B, like, beyond that, the next step is obviously that 2-day campaign or whatever he's going to have to the general electorate.
I think that to your first point, that there are going to be a heck of a lot of Liberal voters who will see him as something fresh, something different from what they've been used to with the Trudeau era. It's always been the same gang tightly controlling the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office. That's the type of thing that Canadians found stifling. And I do think that Carney last night showed a side of him that I've known for some time. Everybody was always saying, he's going to be like Ignatieff, he can't talk to people and so forth. And people saw somebody who was able to riff for the better part of 20 minutes with Jon Stewart and come off quite well. With regard to the wider public, it's going to be very interesting to keep an eye on two things. One is the polling numbers, because my theory, and a lot of people in the polling industry tend to agree, that a lot of the votes that were said to be going to Poilievre and the Conservatives were people who were just fed up with Trudeau. They just didn't want to see the guy anymore. And the pious scolding, to quote Steve Marr's great line. So I think that there is a fair bit of that fresh air, that freshness that Carney represents, deep experience, tons of expertise, and the ability to talk with people, as we saw. He's going to be launching in a town where he went to high school, in Edmonton. Word is he might even be running there. It's going to be worth watching. I think that the overall Canadian public is going to give him a chance. And I got some very interesting information from one very large ethnic cultural community over the weekend that had been drifting over to Poilievre and the Conservatives, looking to see which way things were going to go. And a lot of them are now heading back to the Liberals because they think Carney's going to win it.
Let me put some numbers to what we're talking about, Rob, and then get you to jump in. So Leger just polled over the past few days, Liberal supporters and then the wider electorate. Among Liberal supporters, 21% were supportive of Freeland, 27% of Mark Carney. It went down steeply from there. Christy Clark, 6%, Champagne at 4%, someone else at 5%, and I don't know at 30%. Among all respondents, Christy Freeland actually had a 1% edge, which is obviously within the margin of error over Mark Carney. Mark Carney at just 13%, Freeland at 14%, and then it dips again. Someone else at 14% as well, and I don't know. At a staggering 46%. What does that tell you at this juncture?
Well, I mean, polls are very tricky when you're dealing with leadership, especially because it is who shows up to vote. I mean, how many are going to turn out? Who sells the memberships? Who can rally the support? I mean, it does feel to me, watching it from Toronto, that it is very much between Chrystia Freeland, who's a Toronto MP, and Mark Carney, who is a well-known figure on Bay Street, let's just say. I don't disagree with Lisa. It's a bit of a stretch to call him an outsider, but Tom is right that he did well last night on Jon Stewart. There were some softball questions, some oddball questions, and I thought he rolled with the punches much better than I thought he would. He's never particularly impressed me. His speaking at speeches and his encounters with reporters have never blown my mind as the second coming of Barack Obama or something. But I thought he showed a comfort level. And if you contrast his discussion with Jon Stewart and say Pierre Poilievre's discussion with Jordan Peterson, granted that the one with Peterson was a 2-hour podcast. It's a marathon. And this last night was just 20 minutes. It's an interesting kind of take. I thought it was also not odd. It was telling how the Tories are already saying, look, he didn't come back for you. They're saying they're sending out videos of him calling himself a European at the World Economic Forum, which is, that's red meat for their base. But he was throwing shade on Poilievre last night, basically calling him a career politician who has never worked in the markets and never had a real job. That's a sore point because it's actually true. Poilievre hasn't had any real world experience. Now, Carney's experience is not the same as most people's. I mean, when was the last time he went to a grocery store? It might have been Fortnum and Mason in Piccadilly in London. I mean, he doesn't really exude the common touch, even though I know he's originally an Albertan.
I wonder, Brian, I had a number of calls today from Liberal MPs who were supportive of Carney, but worried about the appearance of a coronation. Do you think that would send a bad signal?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, it's certainly, to Rob's point, I think there's going to be at least one other candidate go through right to the process, if not a few more. So I don't think that'll happen. And look, I just want to be clear, too. I agree with Lisa's points to some extent. I think it's fair to say Carney's an outsider of the Trudeau government, but I think it's completely fair to say, and frankly, the Conservatives have done a good job of starting quite early on doing this, that he was connected to the government. I think that's fair, and there's certainly a lot of proof points. So I think those two things are true at the same time. So whether that's an outsider enough for the party to win the leadership, we'll see, and whether it's a message that will resonate with Canadians if he ends up winning, we'll see. If that's the case. What's interesting for Freeland is she would be, Deputy Prime Minister for 9 years or several years, Minister of Finance, high-profile minister. You would think that would be the standing bearer of the standard bearer of the sort of Trudeau government. But then obviously we know what happened a week ago. So it's kind of like it's a very weird dynamic. You have one that was sort of an outsider, but kind of hugged the government a bit over the last few months. And then you had one that was completely a part of the government and kind of distanced themselves right at the last minute. So interesting dynamic, to say the least.
Yeah, in Freeland's case, Lisa, I was just talking to one of the MPs on air, Alexander Meadows, who's supporting her, and asking, like, to what degree does she have to distance herself from Trudeau beyond even, what happened on December 16th? And her argument was she doesn't. And I wonder what you thought of that.
Yeah, I don't think she can. But equally, you pointed out at the top of the segment that, quite frankly, Mr. Carney has a problem with the carbon tax. He wrote about it glowingly in his book. And what he said last night wasn't that there was not going to be a carbon tax. He said that there's not going to be a carbon tax right now. So he's not abandoning it. And of course, the Conservatives have a very strong position that you'll never have to pay the carbon tax, whereas Mr. Carney seems to be saying, well, right now may not be the best time for you to do it, but, maybe in the future. And if the election is about a carbon tax, he's going to have a hard place to go from there. And I don't quite know where the rest of the Liberals are going to go on it. Certainly, Chrystia has the ability to say that she broke rank with the Prime Minister at the end and she was contrary to what he has to say. And she may not be the most favored nation in this competition right now. So she can come at it from that point of view. But she's going to wear the entire last 12 years that she's been there.
Will caucus support matter ultimately, Tom, in the end? Right now, the most caucus support is definitely with Carney, but there's a lot of people who have, are holding their decision for a little while.
That's wise, by the way. You don't always have to declare immediately, but of course, people have ambitions and getting on the right side helps. I see the team around Carney spinning the number of 30 MPs. In my experience, if they're spinning the number 30, they probably got more than that. And they want to shock and awe with the number that they're able to out on the day of. I think that Carney on the carbon tax is able to walk away from it because he's articulate enough on issues of environment and climate to be able to come up with a plan that talks to Canadians who care about climate change, think that Canada should be doing something about climate change, but know that we've got an economy that's based in large part on natural resources, including, in particular, oil and gas. So Carney, I do think, is going to be able to square that circle. I think he's going to be able to say, look, the way they did it with the carbon tax, and he's already done that publicly before Trudeau announced he was leaving. He's already on the public record saying it wasn't the only way to do this. And it's true, it's not the only way. I think it does have the skill set to be able to pull this off. Will he be able to separate himself from past quotes? No. But what we saw in Jon Stewart last night is they've got a very rich vein to be mined of former Poilievre quotes. And this is going to be very interesting. Poilievre and the people around him have been doing everything they can to say he's changed. He's not the smarmy guy that you remember from Parliament, but I spent more than 10 years with Poilievre. I remember that guy well. So I think that the Liberals are going to do a great job of bringing back the other Poilievre so that people don't forget that that's also the guy that they've got in front of them.
I look forward to this battle of the quotes and waiting my way through.